Now, at the end of this passage, 43 and 44, Jesus tells them, I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a nation that will produce the proper fruit. Okay. And then it goes on to say that the religious leaders realized what Jesus was saying and who he was talking about. They understood that he was calling them the evil farmers, and they got angry and they wanted to do something about it, but they couldn't at the time. So Jesus is saying the Pharisees, are the evil farmers in this parable. Just like they killed the prophets before him, they will do the same with him. He is the son in the story, and God is the owner sending his son. They even rejected the son. Jesus was their last chance. Okay, so we read verse 43 again. I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a nation that will produce the proper fruit. So Jesus, a Jew, is telling Jews, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you, and I'm going to give it to another nation that will produce the proper fruit. What nation is that? Okay, so Jesus is telling the Jews the kingdom of God will be taken away from them because of their rejection of him. To reject Jesus is to reject God, because Jesus is God. I know that's a big one, very difficult for a lot of people to understand, but Jesus is God. Okay, it's really that simple. So to reject Jesus is to reject God. They didn't see it that way, but that's the truth. And they will be replaced by another nation because of their rejection. So how can that be if they are the descendants of Abraham? Okay, because we see that the Pharisees throughout the New Testament, they say, well, we're descendants of Abraham, right? In later verses that we'll get to, we're the descendants of Abraham, and they thought that was good enough, that they had an easy ticket, that it was a surefire thing, just because they were descendants of Abraham, because they're physical Jews, they're literal Jews, right? But Jesus is telling them here in verse 43 of Matthew 21, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you. So how can the kingdom of God be taken away from them if they are the descendants of Abraham? There must be more to who the true descendants of Abraham actually are. So we must ask ourselves, who is a true Jew? If they're Jews and God and Jesus is saying the kingdom of God will be taken away from them, then who is a true Jew, and what makes you a true Jew? Now let's look at Matthew chapter 8. Open up to Matthew chapter 8, and we're gonna start in verse 10. And this one is about the faith of a Roman officer, or the centurion, right? You may have heard the centurion. This Roman officer comes and he asks Jesus to heal his young servant. And Jesus says, I'll go and heal him. Jesus agrees. Okay, I'll go and heal him. But the officer says, no. All you have to do is say the word and he will be healed. This Roman officer was so convinced that Jesus was who he said he was, and probably didn't want to waste any time. No, don't worry about coming, Jesus. Just say the word, it will be done. But he was so convinced that Jesus was who he said he was, and he just said, no. Just say the word, and I know he will be healed. But his response was powerful. Just say the word. Okay. Now it's important to understand that this Roman officer is clearly not a Jew. He's a Gentile. Okay. And he is so convinced that Jesus is who he is that he comes to Jesus and he asks him to heal his young servant. Jesus says, okay, I'll go and heal him. And he stops Jesus and says, no, just say the word. Just say the word and it'll happen. That's how convinced he was. My dad used to always talk about being totally persuaded, right? In an unrelated verse, but this comes to my mind right now. My dad used to always talk about being totally persuaded. And this comes from an unrelated verse to what I'm saying right now, but it just popped into my head. This Roman officer was totally persuaded. He was completely convinced that Jesus was who he said he was, and all Jesus had to do was say the word, and it would be done. So picking up in Matthew chapter 8, verse 10, when Jesus heard this, he was amazed. Turning to those who were following him, he said, I tell you the truth, I haven't seen faith like this in all Israel. And I tell you this, that many Gentiles will come from all over the world, from east and west, and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob at the feast in the kingdom of heaven. Those three names are very important, right? Going back to the beginning of the Bible study. He says, and I tell you this, Jesus is talking, and I tell you this, that many Gentiles will come from all over the world, from east and west, and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob at the feast in the kingdom of heaven. But many Israelites, those for whom the kingdom was prepared, will be thrown into outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So Jesus is saying that a Roman officer, a Gentile, has more faith than any Jew he has come across in all of Israel. And he says that many Gentiles will come from all over the world and they'll sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob at the feast in the kingdom of heaven. But many Israelites will be cast out and thrown out into outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.